The haunting echoes. In the small, forgotten town of Ravenswood, nestled deep within a dense, ancient forest, there was a legend that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest souls. It was said that when the moon hung low, and the night was at its darkest, a mysterious figure would emerge from the shadows, its tortured screams echoing through the trees. The locals spoke of this figure in hushed tones, calling it the Banshee of Ravenswood. They claimed that if you were unfortunate enough to hear its wailing cry, you were marked as the next victim. No one knew who the Banshee was, or what dark fate had bound it to this forsaken place. One fateful night, as a thick fog rolled in, obscuring the town in an eerie, suffocating embrace, a stranger arrived. His name was Samuel, a weary traveler seeking shelter from the encroaching darkness. The locals, though hesitant, welcomed him with cautious hospitality. As the night wore on, the town grew silent, except for the distant hoots of owls and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Samuel, eager for respite, retired to his room in the creaking inn, just as he began to drift into a fitful sleep. A bone-chilling wail sliced through the silence. His heart raced as the unearthly sound reverberated through the walls. Samuel's breath hitched, and he dared not move. He listened intently, praying that it was merely a trick of the wind, but then it came again, closer this time, and unmistakably human. Terrified, Samuel leapt from his bed, his pulse pounding in his ears. He could feel the presence of the Banshee drawing near, its mournful cry growing louder with every passing second. Panicking, he fumbled for his belongings, desperate to escape the clutches of this malevolent force. Through the thin veil of fog that crept through his window, Samuel glimpsed a shadowy figure, draped in tattered, flowing robes, gliding through the night. Its face was hidden in darkness, but its piercing, anguished cries echoed in the stillness. Samuel's breath hitched, and with a surge of adrenaline, he burst from the room, stumbling down the narrow, winding stairwell. The innkeeper, awakened by the commotion, watched in wide-eyed horror as Samuel fled into the night. The Banshee pursued, its presence suffusing the forest, the relentless wailing pursuing Samuel's every step. The very air grew thick with dread, as if the world itself mourned his impending fate. Samuel sprinted blindly through the dense underbrush, his heart pounding in time with the Banshee's relentless cries. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body pushed to its limits. Just as he felt his strength failing, he stumbled upon an ancient, overgrown mausoleum, its stone doors ajar, with the Banshee's wail drawing impossibly closer. Samuel sought refuge within the tomb. He pushed against the heavy doors, the cold, ancient stone yielding just enough for him to slip inside. As the doors groaned shut, the unearthly screams fell silent. Inside the mausoleum, the air was heavy with the scent of decay and long-forgotten memories. Samuel huddled in the darkness, heart pounding, listening for any sign of the Banshee's approach. Hours passed, the silence broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing. Eventually, exhausted and on the edge of madness, he dared to venture back into the night. The forest lay still, as if the Banshee had never existed. Samuel's trembling legs carried him back to Ravenswood, where the townsfolk met him with wide-eyed wonder. They had heard the wails too, but they never spoke of what horrors they imagined that night. Samuel left Ravenswood, forever haunted by the memory of the Banshee's anguished cries. He knew that he had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, but the knowledge that the Banshee still roamed the woods, waiting for its next victim, would forever haunt his dreams. The house. In a forgotten corner of the town, nestled between gnarled trees and shrouded in an eerie mist, stood an ancient mansion. Locals whispered of its sinister history, avoiding the place like a plague. The house seemed to exude a malevolent aura, its windows like the vacant eyes of a specter, always watching. Generations had passed since anyone dared to enter, but one fateful night, a curious soul named Ethan found himself drawn to the ominous structure. The wind howled, carrying with it the anguished cries of forgotten souls, urging him forward. As he approached, The moonlight revealed the mansion's decrepit state. Its time-worn facade bore scars from years of neglect. And the once grand entrance now seemed like the gaping maw of a beast, ready to consume any who dared to cross the threshold. Ethan hesitated, but a mysterious force compelled him to step inside. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. As if the very walls were alive with a sinister presence, cobwebs clung like funeral veils, and the floorboards creaked mournfully beneath his weight. In the heart of the mansion, a grand hall stretched out before him, its chandeliers swaying gently, casting eerie, dancing shadows. Portraits of somber-faced figures lined the walls, their eyes following his every move, as if yearning to tell their untold tales. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant echoes of phantom footsteps. As Ethan ventured further, he stumbled upon a hidden chamber, concealed behind a rotting tapestry. Within, a cryptic journal lay open, its pages filled with cryptic, blood-stained entries recounting the horrors that had befallen those who dwelled here. With each page, the air grew heavier, and a presence materialized, lurking just beyond the veil of sight. The sensation of being watched intensified, a suffocating weight pressing down on Ethan's chest. Panic surged through him, urging him to flee. But a chilling voice whispered in his ear, urging him to stay. As the clock struck midnight, the mansion seemed to come alive. Phantom footsteps grew louder, echoing through the hallways. Whispers of long-forgotten secrets filled the air. Chilling Ethan's bones, he knew he was not alone. In a room veiled in shadows, a figure materialized. Its form was hazy, a specter from another time, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly malevolence. It reached out, fingers like icy tendrils, and in that moment, Ethan understood the true horror that dwelled within this accursed place. With a surge of adrenaline, he turned and fled. His heart pounding like a drum in the night, the house seemed to resist his escape, its walls groaning and shifting, as if determined to keep its secrets. But Ethan was determined to break free, to leave behind the terror that lurked within those haunted halls. As he stumbled out into the moonlit night, the mansion loomed behind him, a dark silhouette against the pale glow. He vowed never to return, to leave behind the horrors that dwelled within, and to warn others of the malevolent force that still clung to that forsaken house. The Shadows. In a desolate, forgotten village, a chill wind whispered through the empty streets. Mark, a weathered traveler, stumbled upon the eerie silence, his senses on edge. He could feel the weight of the air, heavy with an unsettling presence. Mark's nightmare began in a decaying cathedral, its walls adorned with faded tapestries and the scent of old incense still lingering in the air. He couldn't recall how he got there, but he knew he had to find a way out. As he navigated the echoing halls, whispers brushed against his ears, a chorus of indistinct, spectral voices. Without warning, the ground gave way, plunging him into a pit of shifting shadows. He landed on cold, damp earth, encircled by towering, twisted trees. The moon cast its silver glow through the gnarled branches, painting malevolent figures on the forest floor. Mark's heart raced as he tried to make sense of the surreal environment. Each step echoed endlessly, the forest extending into a void that defied logic. Panic clawed at his throat, but he pressed forward, driven by an inexplicable compulsion. As the night stretched on, reality twisted and distorted. Trees transformed into contorted hands, their bony fingers brushing against his skin. The shadows seemed to pulse, throbbing with an ominous vitality. In the distance, a haunting melody floated through the air, like a lamentation pulling him deeper into the abyss. Mark resisted, but the music seemed to seep into his bones, mingling dread with a strange sense of longing. Through the tangled woods, Mark stumbled upon an ancient burial ground. The tombstones rose like silent sentinels, their inscriptions worn away by time. Among them, a single grave stood out, adorned with wilted lilies and a flickering, ghostly light. Mark approached cautiously, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. The name on the grave was his, etched in faded letters. Horror coursed through him as he realized he was ensnared in a nightmare that refused to release its grip. Desperation gnawed at his soul, urging him to awaken. But every attempt proved fruitless. Each time he believed he was on the cusp of freedom, the nightmare twisted and contorted, drawing him back into its suffocating embrace. Time lost its meaning, and Mark's mind began to unravel. He could no longer discern between the dream and reality. The once menacing surroundings melded into a nightmarish mosaic that threatened to devour his sanity. And then, just as hope teetered on the edge of oblivion, Mark heard a distant voice calling his name. It was faint, like a distant echo, but it was real. With newfound determination, he followed the sound, pushing through the oppressive darkness. As he emerged from the clutches of the nightmare, Mark awoke with a gasp, his heart thundering in his chest. He was soaked in sweat, the memory of the nightmare still vivid in his mind. He clung to the reality around him, grateful to have escaped that endless nightmare that had nearly consumed his soul. Echoes of the forgotten. The night began like any other, the moon casting its silver veil over the world, but for Emily, it was the beginning of a nightmare she couldn't fathom. As she lay in bed, a peculiar sensation crept over her. It was as if a shadow passed through her mind, erasing fragments of her identity. Panic surged, heart pounding in the dark silence. Who was she? What was her name? She stumbled to the mirror, but the reflection offered no solace. A stranger with haunted eyes stared back. The room around her felt foreign, hostile even. Goosebumps prickled her skin, a chilling wind whispering secrets she couldn't understand. Over the days, the amnesia grew like ivy, coiling around every memory. Faces blurred into shapeless masks, places turned into shifting mazes. Emily clung to her journal, linked the last tether to a fading reality. Each entry was a desperate plea, words etched in frantic strokes, trying to capture fragments of herself before they slipped away. But the pages filled with disjointed musings, like shards of a shattered mirror, reflecting nothing but chaos. Emily's world became a waking nightmare. The once familiar streets were now a labyrinth of uncertainty. The laughter of friends echoed hollow, their names swallowed by the abyss within her mind. In her darkest moments, Emily found solace in a dusty attic, hidden away like a secret chamber of forgotten treasures. Amongst moth-eaten books and forgotten relics, she unearthed a photograph, the relic of a life once lived. It depicted a smiling woman, eyes bright with promise. Was this her, or a phantom of someone else's past? Time became a treacherous river, carrying her further from the shore of herself. She clung to moments, to fleeting emotions, but they slipped through her fingers like smoke. The echo of her name, once a beacon of identity, now sounded foreign and distant. One fateful night, Emily stared into the mirror, the stranger's eyes reflecting back. There was a resignation in that gaze, a surrender to the relentless tide of oblivion. She no longer fought against the encroaching darkness, it was futile. And then, in the hushed stillness of that forsaken room, Emily vanished. The world spun on, ignorant of the void left behind. A space once occupied by a girl who no longer remembered her own name. In the annals of time, Emily's story became a whispered legend, a cautionary tale of the fragility of memory. Her name was lost to the ages, a phantom in the corridors of forgotten souls, forever adrift in the shadows of oblivion. The Abyssal Pact. The night was darker than any I'd ever known, the waves crashing against the boat with a malevolence that sent shivers down my spine. I was alone, adrift in a sea that seemed to stretch into eternity. The fog hung thick, obscuring everything beyond an arm's reach. As hours turned to days, my rations dwindled, and desperation gnawed at my resolve. That's when I heard it, a whisper carried on the wind, a voice that seemed to emanate from the depths of the abyss itself. Lost soul, it hissed, the words echoing in the hollows of my mind. You are mine. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. There, amidst the oppressive fog, I saw it, a spectral figure, eyes gleaming like burning embers. Its form shifted and contorted, the air around it pulsating with an unnatural energy. What are you? I stammered, my voice barely a breath. I am what has always been, and what will always be, it replied. Its voice a cacophony of whispers, a keeper of souls, adrift in the forgotten corners of the sea. I felt a suffocating dread settle over me. What do you want from me, your soul? It hissed, a promise of torment lingering in its words. In exchange for passage to a realm beyond your feeble mortal comprehension. I knew I had no choice. The phantom's presence was a malevolence I could not deny, and the sea offered no salvation. With trembling hands, I reached into my pocket and produced a small silver pendant, an heirloom passed down through generations. The specter's eyes burned brighter, fixated on the pendant. A token of your intent, it crooned, a binding oath to seal our pact. With quaking hands, I extended the pendant toward the phantom. It hovered before it, absorbing the gleam of the tarnished silver. As the pendant touched its smoky form, a searing pain shot through me, as if icy talons had pierced my heart. I gasped. Struggling to maintain consciousness, the specter's eyes flared, its dark form growing stronger. It is done, it intoned, its voice triumphant. You are bound to me, and to the eternal sea. The world seemed to spin, reality warping around me. I was no longer aboard the forsaken vessel, but suspended in a realm of shadow and despair. The sea, now a churning abyss, stretched out infinitely in all directions. And there, beside me, the spectral figure grinned with glee. My soul now a prize in its clutches. As the years passed, I became one with the damned. I wraith adrift in a sea of forgotten souls, and together, we sailed through the eternal night. A legion bound by the Abyssal Pact. The forgotten town. The air grew thick with anticipation, as the group of friends trudged deeper into the heart of the dense woods. The trees seemed to close in around them, casting long shadows that danced eerily in the fading light. They had heard whispers about the forgotten town, a place that time had left behind, and their curiosity had led them here. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they stumbled upon it. The forgotten town, it lay nestled in a small clearing. Its buildings crooked and decayed, windows shattered and doorways yawning like the mouths of the damned. Ivy tendrils reached out, reclaiming what was once theirs. They exchanged uneasy glances, but the thrill of exploration overpowered their apprehension. They pushed open creaking doors, revealing forgotten lives frozen in time. Empty homes were filled with remnants of past lives, a child's toy, a dusty photograph, a forgotten diary. It was as though the occupants had vanished in the middle of their lives, leaving behind a chilling void. As night fell, a creeping unease settled over the group. Shadows grew darker, and the town seemed to breathe with a malevolent energy. Whispers of the wind sounded like distant voices, and footsteps echoed through the empty streets. Then, they heard it, a faint, mournful wail that sent shivers down their spines. Panic gripped them, and they hurriedly retraced their steps, desperate to escape this forsaken place. But the town seemed to shift, pathways bending and buildings rearranging themselves like a maze designed to keep them trapped. In their frantic attempts to escape, they stumbled upon the town square, where an ancient oak tree stood. Its branches twisted and gnarled. A sense of foreboding emanated from it, as if it held the answers to the town's dark secret. As they approached, the ground trembled beneath them, and the air grew heavy with a palpable malevolence. The tree's branches creaked and swayed, casting grotesque silhouettes on the ground. Suddenly, a voice emerged from the shadows. A guttural whisper that seemed to come from the very earth itself. You should not have come here, it rasped. This town is cursed. A prison for the damned. The friends turned, eyes wide with terror. But there was no one to be seen. Only the twisted, ancient tree stood sentinel in the night. As the voice spoke, the earth seemed to come alive. Roots snaking from the ground and wrapping around their ankles, they struggled, but the roots tightened, pulling them closer to the cursed tree. Their screams echoed through the empty streets, swallowed by the malevolent darkness. And then, silence. The forgotten town reclaimed its secrets. Leaving no trace of the intruders, the night resumed its eerie stillness, as if nothing had ever disturbed the desolate place. From then on, the woods bore an even darker legend, a tale of the forgotten town. A place where the curious vanish, claimed by the town's terrifying secret, forever lost to the depths of its cursed history.